Do you have a 6x6 paper pad that you would like to turn into a stack of holiday cards without making pattern paper scraps? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. Today I have the Michaels Recollections Holiday Cheers collection. It is 24 sheets of double-sided paper from 2024. I am going to be using a variety of supplies from Michaels today so that you could go in and pick up hopefully everything you need for your project if you would like to. But of course you could apply a lot of these ideas to other 6x6 paper pads that are out there. I am going to be mostly working with A2 cards, but I think I'm going to put in a few 5x7 cards too, just to take advantage of some of the larger prints that are on these papers. I did pick up these Snowflake. It's a set of cards and envelopes from Michaels, and it has these silver snowflakes on it. And I thought that it might be nice to have a little something in the background of the card bases, especially for some of the designs that it doesn't fill as much. And then also it can be quite convenient for new card makers who maybe aren't as familiar with making their own card bases, or, you know, I just wanted to mix it up, do something a little bit different. So we have those, we have 24 of these at least to use. I have some 5x7 cards. I did pick up a sticker book that seemed like it would go well with this collection. There were two collections that I liked a lot from Michaels this year. I picked the the Holiday Cheers for 6x6 and the Sprinkle Shop in 12x12. So there will be some videos with that 12x12 pad. Keep an eye out. I also have this set of die cut stickers. They have, I guess, silver and gold sort of theme to them, and they have a lot of good sentiments and then just pretty images. And I'm using some purple Recollections cardstock for some of my card mats. I don't know, I probably purchased this years ago, and I don't know if they'll have the same exact color, but they do have some colored cardstock you can use for your card mats. I made a note to myself that it is very similar to the Lawn Fawn Grape Jelly ink. So if you're maybe that's something to compare to in your collection. Okay, so let's get started. I want to try to be a little bit more concise than I was in the previous video that I made with a different Michaels pack this year. So I went through and I started thinking about which of these patterned papers might be a little more challenging to use. First two seem pretty easy. I think it's actually three. Then we came to the Merry and Bright paper, and last time I did one of these videos, I shared a brand new template for 5x7 cards where I am taking a 6x3 chunk out of the center and then using some smaller strips from the top and bottom. I think that will work again today. So I will take those two papers, because there's two of each design. There are 12 different patterns. These are double-sided paper. I think I mentioned that already, but I do prefer double-sided patterned paper. And so I'll pair those together. I usually put them in some envelopes, but you could put them in a tray or a folder or something like that. Okay, and then you can also put your card bases in there. The next tricky paper that I came to, this one it wasn't obvious at first, because when you're flipping through the pad you see the Christmas tree side, but then on the back side I wanted to somehow utilize these pretty ornaments. So I picked 6x6 paper busting template number 26, which uses a large chunk of paper. And so I'm going to be cutting down the center and using half of the ornaments on one card and half on the other. I will probably come back and pick some other sheets of patterned paper that are like easy to work with and add it to each of these. So like I might make more cards with this sketch, but I knew that I wanted to address those challenging papers first. And I think that is something that's hopefully helpful to others. Like that's, you know, I think a lot of us are like, yeah, I know what to do with some of those like really simple ones, but I like some ideas for the more challenging ones. This one has a large, these houses that are going across. So these are like kind of like stripes, and it's not terribly challenging. I think you do a lot of things with it, but I do think it benefits from having a sketch or a design that has a large piece of paper. So rather than cutting into like small 1-inch squares or something like that, I want something with some larger pieces. So I picked 6x6 paper busting template number 29. All of these templates are available for free. In the video description, they'll be linked. You can download each one individually. If you'd rather not download them individually, you can purchase packs on Etsy that like give you a PDF with a whole bunch of different ones depending on the size of pack that you purchase, and then you can just download them in one file, print them in one file. But I'm going to pair that with number 29. Let's see, another tricky one was this one here, and I decided this one also worked well with 6x6 for 5x7 number 11. So we already picked a paper for that. We're gonna come up with another. So we're gonna come back to that one that we put in the envelope, and we're gonna put this sheet in there too. I will have to change up how I cut it, and I will review how I cut all of these next. That'll be the next big thing that I do. Okay, so these had these like 3x3 squares. I do notice a little challenge about this pattern paper is just this hole at the top, and it does go into the patterns. So if I were to cut this across at the hole, I am gonna cut off this star a little bit and maybe the top of this bow. So that's a little bit of a bummer. I'm kind of concerned. I was looking at the measurements, and I think that when you cut at the hole, you're actually gonna have slightly less than 6 inches of patterned paper, which is a little bit of a bummer because these sketches really work with exactly 6 inches of paper. It's not a big deal. We're totally gonna work around it, but I do want to point that out. So I think sketch number 39 will work well, and that is because sketch 39 has a large 3x3 square and some smaller bits. And I think that here I like the Christmas tree and the snow globe. Hung with care, I think could be fine on the front of a card. Pour a little holiday cheer, I think also works as a sentiment on a card. So what I'm gonna do is pick my 2 favorite ones and put those as the large sentiment in the center. And then for these little squares, I'm gonna use the back side of my least favorite ones of these. You could also pair it with another piece of patterned paper and use all 4 of these as a focal point and take that second piece of patterned paper and cut them all as little squares. And we might talk a little bit more about that later on. Okay, 6x6 paper busting template number 9 for these tags. These tags look like if I cut the patterned paper to 2 inches, so I divide 6 by 3, I get 2. And then if I cut it in half, that'll be 3 inches. So it's like, okay, I have a template that has 2 by 3 inch tags, or 2 by 3 inch rectangles that I can then basically cut these tags out of. Now, if you want, you could totally just cut these tags out and then throw away the little tiny scraps that are left. I don't really consider those scraps because they're not usable. They're so small, or they're very difficult to use. But I think I'm just gonna cut them as 2 by 3 inch rectangles. And so I will be using this sketch, and I will probably pair an additional patterned paper with this sketch so that I don't have to, if I want to use a couple of tags, because if you look at the sketch, right now, you're using 2 rectangles in the background and 1 as a focal point in either version. I have 2 versions of this sketch, and I even have a third idea that might come in handy for this particular set of tags. But, so I would then only get to use 2 tags from each patterned paper. I think I like more than 2 from each patterned paper. So therefore, I'm going to have an extra sheet of patterned paper to kind of mix and match so that I can use more of the tags. And I think we have we have one more challenge. Of course, I should have known because I have one more sketch here. Okay, but I do need to pick something to go with that eventually. So I may as well just take the next 2 sheets and pair it up. Then we have our last challenging piece. This is the last actually set of designs in the collection as well. It is these stripes, and I thought it might work with 6x6 paper busting template number 34 because these trees at the top, if I have to cut off this circle, what's left is about 1 inch. And this uses a 1-inch strip right along the bottom here. And then it uses some longer strips, which I can use the backside for. So I can cut off either the top or bottom at 1 inch. And I could adjust it a little bit too. So like say you really want to use the ornaments instead, and they're wider than 1 inch, we could make some adjustments and accommodate for that. So instead of using, I think, let's see, that's the measurements here. The bottom ornaments are about 1.5 inches. And so then what you would do is just take a 1/2 inch off of each of these length measurements here. So instead of being 5 inches, it would be 4.5. And then the mat, instead of being 5.25, would be 4.75. I took a 1/2 inch off of each measurement and just kind of readjust the sketch a little bit to make it work. But I think I'll use the trees. So rather than cutting these little strips off the bottom of the paper, when I go to cut it, I'm going to cut it off the top of the patterned paper. Now, we have some patterned paper left, and I'm gonna just put them in their sets of 2, because there's 2 of each. I think it's a little bit easier to make the same card. So if I have 2 sheets of patterned paper, each of my templates makes usually between 2 and 4 cards, but often 2. I think I picked mostly 2 this time, except for that 5x7 one. So I find it easier to just make them all the same, and then maybe I can add, you know, different embellishments or something to change them up. Okay, so I have these 4 that I need to add in to another one of these. This particular sketch works well for directional pattern paper. I know at least these 2 are directional. Let's check the other side. This one I think could go in any direction, so I don't have to worry about that. This one, I think it's pretty clear that's meant to be the top, but when it's turned on its side, it doesn't look bad at all. I don't think, you know, snowflakes or triangles, diamonds have to be in any particular direction, so I consider that non-directional, and the back the same way. So since this works with directional pattern paper, I'll just add 1 more sheet to it. Then I already added 1 extra sheet to these, so I might just leave that so I don't have too many of that 1 card. This is a fun one. It does work with directional pattern paper. It gives you a pretty big chunk of paper to show off, but it is a little, well, you know what? It looks like I have enough. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put 2 in here, and then this one can get an extra sheet. So we'll make, instead of making just 4 cards, we'll make 8 cards with this one as well. Although I'm kind of tempted to make it a little bit more of an exciting pattern. Oh, I'm not sure it matters. This is when I try to be like quick in my decisions and not overthink things too much. This one here though, because it shows off so much of the pattern paper, I'm kind of tempted to pick a more interesting paper than that one. And I might go back to like the ornament patterned paper that we had an extra of. And so I'll switch, I'll do the ornaments where you get to see a lot of that pretty ornament paper with that one. And then I'll take this needles, they're like pine needles, and grid, and I'll put it here with sketch 39. Okay, so now we've like organized all of it and every piece of paper is accounted for, and now we can just go into the process of making each one of these sets of cards. All right, let's cut 6x6 paper busting template for 5x7 cards. Number 11, I have 4 sheets of patterned paper. Each sheet makes 1 card. So I will make 4 5x7 cards. So therefore I won't be using the snowflakes because those are A2 cards. When I go to cut this circle off the top and I come to the very edge of the circle, you may have a wire guide on your paper trimmer or something else that helps you. Of course, follow all manufacturer's instructions and be safe with paper trimmers, sharp tools. I'm gonna try to cut as close as possible to that edge so that I'm preserving as much paper as possible. And then even still, it is like just a hair, very, very small, but just a hair under 6 inches. The first cut that it asks me to, okay, so I have not printed the new version of this sketch, but you need to cut these 1.5 inch strips. It could be off the top and bottom, which we're gonna do today for this one. It could be both of the 1.5 inch strips off the top, which was gonna be the second card. So you can rearrange this but I need some 1.5 inch strips and I need a big 3-inch strip, but I want this big 3-inch strip to be the center here. So if I cut 1.5 inches off, I want to be sure that I'm not gonna cut any of the Mary off. So what it might be helpful to do is take a scrap of cardstock or something, line it up with the edge of your paper trimmer. Again, if you have a wire guide, this should be much simpler, but I wanna make sure I cut off the bow, but not the words, and it's a very thin margin. You might be using a totally different pattern paper and then this doesn't matter at all, but I still didn't get the whole bow. I was close though. Enough that I think it kind of looks okay. But okay, then we need the 3 inches in the center. We want to make sure we get the entire bright sentiment, which it looks like we will. And it may wind up that if to cut this 3 inches, just because of this, the preciseness of this paper, this might be a little less than 1/2. That's totally okay. Make it work. So then we're gonna cut this in half to 3 inches. And we're using the back side of these, so it does not matter that half, like cutting that in half cuts the bow in half. We're not using that side. Okay. Then just because this one requires a little bit of precision and changing up the sketch a bit, this time you're gonna cut the 3 inches off of the bottom. And then your 1.5 inches off the top. I'm gonna first start by cutting that little circle off, and then the 1.5. When you're cutting something like on the smaller side, I do generally think it's easier to cut like a small piece off a larger piece than trying to cut a small piece off a small piece. Hopefully that makes sense. Then these will also get cut in half to 3 inches. I was holding 2 pieces of patterned paper together. I will often do that because my paper trimmer can handle it. You can use your discretion with your own trimmer, whether it's easier for you to cut 1 piece, 2 pieces. Sometimes you can get a few more pieces of patterned paper. Okay, then we need to cut our cardstock. I am not gonna go through cutting the cardstock for every single sketch, but I will show you where you get that information. So I want to show the cutting of the patterned paper, especially in instances where it matters kind of like how you cut it. But for the cardstock mats, there's no real, I don't really have any very helpful tips or anything on it. So if you so you printed out your template, look on the sketch to find the size of the cardstock mats. You don't need to add cardstock mats every time if you don't care for them, but it will say that the patterned paper is whatever measurement, and then with a measurements mat. So that second set of measurements is the size you need to cut your mats to. So in this case, my 6 by 3 inch piece needs a 6 1/4 by 3 1/4 inch mat. This is because I personally like 1/4 inch mats. You might prefer 1/8 inch mats, in which case you'll have to adjust the measurements to only be 1/8 of an inch bigger than the patterned paper, completely up to you. So it says 3 1/4 by 6 1/4. And then here, I know I need a 3 1/4 by 1 3/4 inch mat. I need 4 of those in fact, but I was able to cut 1 out of that leftover piece there. And I need to cut 3 more that are 3 1/4 inch wide, so I think it'll be easier to measure to a 3 1/4. I'm gonna need to cut this 4 times over too anyway, because I have multiple. But again, I like to start with a big piece and cut off a smaller piece. So 1 1/4 is not terribly large, but like sometimes, because this is the one tip I can add. If you're using a guillotine trimmer, sometimes having this like weight hanging off the edge like that can kind of like help your measurement, like can cause your measurements to be a little less precise. It's not a terribly big deal, but I do prefer to say, take, my 1 3/4 off the edge here. So I go, 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 1 3, whatever the measurement is, and cut it off the side. And then I'll keep going till I have enough cardstock for all 4 cards. And we can talk, so I'm gonna go through cutting I'm gonna cut the patterned paper, and then I'll show you assembling the card, and we'll kind of like proceed in a pattern like that. All right, let's assemble 6x6 paper busting template for 5x7 cards number 11. So we are switching to a 5x7 size for this one. We're going to put the cardstock mats in the corner, and then we're going to center the patterned paper over them. I decided to use the back side of this patterned paper. This one was the houses, and we cut the other strips off the top, but they actually were mostly just snowflakes, so you could have gone either way, but I think it is fun. This is like this checkerboard pattern. It's pretty cool, so I wanted to take advantage of that. And then you can think about like how you want to line them up. Like, do you want to make them look matchy-matchy, like this thin line of squares? Should it go with the other thin line of squares, or do you want it to look a little random? Totally up to you. And then we put the large mat here in the center. This one I do think I'm going to try to like not leave a really thin strip, but that seems tough. Kind of just using my judgment at each step of the process for what looks best. And, or you can make sure it's perfectly centered if that's more important to you. The checkerboards definitely add a layer of challenge though. Okay, and then here again for embellishment, I think I'm just going to stamp a sentiment maybe up here in the corner. Let's cut what we need for 6x6 paper busting template 26. So we're going to cut it in half so that it's 3x6, and then we're going to cut a 3/4 inch strip off the bottom. In this case, we're specifically going to do the bottom. Sometimes if you have, depending on like the design or something, you might want to cut that strip from somewhere else, but that works with this particular design because we're trying to show off the ornaments at the top, and then we're going to put the strip's going to come from this part if you look at the final sketch. So we're going to be cutting 3/4 of an inch off the bottom. I'm going to be careful because I have two pieces of paper together. And this will, I can either turn it to the other side, but there's these pink trees, whereas like if I keep it this way and I put a mat around it, I still think it'll look really cute and it'll be a really great easy place for a sentiment and make a fast card. Something that this sketch calls for too is also rounding the corners. So I have my trusty corner chomper from We Are Memory Keepers. That thing's probably 10 plus years old, but it still works a charm. And so I'll do that with the other side as well. And then there's a second piece of paper. We just keep following that same direction. I did also want to briefly highlight this needs only one mat, and it's quite small. It's just 3 1/4 by 1 inch mat. So this is a great place to make sure you're going to your scraps first before you are pulling from anything else or cutting into a large piece of patterned or a large piece of cardstock. Looking at sketch number 26, which I now have 12 cards for because I accidentally cut my second set of papers for sketch number 34 to the size that I needed for sketch number 26. So I have extra cards of it, but we're going to put the little strip here on the purple paper, and then so I'm probably just going to stamp some sentiments on these ones here, but these other ones you wouldn't really be able to read a sentiment on here. And I am not going to use a stamp set from Michaels. I have plenty of Christmas stamp sets, so I'm just going to use something that I have, but there's probably some kind of Christmas sentiment stamp available if you really wanted to keep all of your supplies from Michaels, or if you were needing to find one there. So I originally thought I was going to use these die cut stickers, and I may use some of them, but it was this pack, and a lot of them are vellum, or so this is vellum, so it's like partially opaque, or they are like a more thin sticker. I'm used to these being like cardstock stickers, a lot of these packs, and some of the ones in the pack are cardstock stickers, but I think cardstock stickers work best for what I need. So I did also happen to pick up this other pack that does have some vellum ones and also some cardstock ones. So I'm just gonna kind of keep picking and choosing between all the packs of stickers and etc. that I purchased at the same time. And then let's see, so I want to decorate this, and these are these are more traditional Christmas colors in some of these. Like there's no greens in my patterned paper, but then there are greens in these stickers, so that might be a little bit challenging. I think this one certainly works. And maybe this large Merry Christmas because it also has red. And then we could use that to embellish some of these. Oh wait, we need more than that too. Gingerbread guy is pretty cute. He's a little bit on the thinner side too though, so I don't know if he'll kind of like bump over and not look so good. I think the cardstock helps to give it some stability. There's this Merry Magic sticker, but it's also thin. Oof, this is gonna be a little more challenging than I thought because these were not what I expected when I purchased this sticker pack. So what I can do to change things up is, this would be kind of a little frustrating to do, but I could stick these thinner ones on a piece of cardstock and then cut them back out so that they work better for my intended purpose. The cutting for 6x6 paper busting template number 29 is really easy. You're gonna cut a 3x6 inch strip off the top, and this is what makes it work for directional pattern paper. So you want to cut 3 inches off the top rather than 3 inches down the center so that the directionality continues to work. So we're gonna cut 3 inches, and I kind of did some measurements ahead of time. One of the reasons I picked it for this house sketch is I knew that if I cut it in half, I'd have 2 rows of houses, or I guess they're shops on the top and 2 on the bottom. I'm not sure, maybe it's a combination or something. And then you take that 3x6 inch piece and you're going to cut 3 3/4 off, and then you are left with 2 1/4, and then one of them goes behind. Oh, apparently the sticky note was attached to that. That's what that little pink piece is. And one goes in behind and one goes in front, and you can use opposite sides of the patterned paper depending on what you're looking for. I have sketch number 29. This one is super quick because it's just 2 pieces, but in this particular instance, it's going to let us take advantage of that large house paper. I did think that the snowflakes worked well with this because there was some snowflake in the papers that I was choosing, and also I knew you would see all of the snowflakes because we'd be covering up that center bit of the snowflake cards that is more blank. So for these ones, I'm probably just going to find a small sentiment that I can squeeze in right here, but if I can't find a small sentiment, I'll take a scrap of cardstock and cut a little banner shape and stamp my sentiment on that. Another thing you can do with some of the scrap cardstock that you created from cutting all of the mats is, if you would like, sometimes when you place this down, since I'm using a heavier weight cardstock, it sometimes doesn't like lay super flat across there, and so what you can do is kind of prop it up with an extra bit of cardstock so that it's the same height as this piece here. So you just take a little bit, add some adhesive, and pop that underneath some of your layers, which I will often do, but is not necessary. And then for these ones here, I am going to be able to use my stickers. I actually think that this is a good instance for, if I can find any of the stickers that look good here and like fit, they are gonna stay mostly on that pattern. So I think I'm gonna be able to lay them flat there. I'm thinking this fa la 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 could look really pretty. And then I would need one more. I would want something that is like about the same size or width as this particular piece of patterned paper. I kind of created a giant mess over here now because I was looking through all of my choices earlier. Maybe these silver bells. For 6x6 paper busting template number 9, we're going to be a little bit careful as we cut out these tags. So what I think I'll actually do, a little bit different than I would on something that didn't have this, but I'm going to cut the 2-inch strips first, leaving that white strip on the top so that cutting off the hole here will only affect this piece of paper and not these. And so then I'm going to cut this to the 3 inches. Because we're making 2 by 3 inch pieces for this, and then I'll also cut this exactly to the 3 inches, as long as it doesn't cut off part of the top of the tag. And so we'll do that same thing on this one. We'll just cut it exactly at 3 inches. But now this tricky one here. Okay, if I cut the hole off exactly, I'm leaving myself a pretty thin margin up here. That should be fine, but it will probably mean that my paper is just under the 3-inch mark. And so ideally, yeah, it's really, really close, like maybe an 1/8, 1/16 of an inch off or something like that. But that might make it better suited to being like the focal point one than one of the background ones or something like that. But I just didn't want to have to make sure, like, because when I do cut mats for these, that like 1/16 of an inch becomes a touch more noticeable when it's matted on something versus when it's not. So that is something you can keep in mind. But on most of these sketches, cutting around it wouldn't really matter, but for these tags. And again, if you prefer, you can absolutely just go in with a scissor and cut these tags out. They do have a bit of a shadow around them, so I think that they work well as is. But I know some people, and this is sometimes my inclination too, is that I have to put something in this like circle. Like I feel like sometimes I feel like I have to punch it out and put something in it, especially if I were to cut it out exactly like a tag. But if I leave them like this, I don't think I'll feel as obligated. For 6x6 paper busting template number 9, we are going to change things up just the tiniest bit. Instead of making a portrait card for the sketch, we're going to make a vertical card because the sentiment I have is vertical. And so we're placing those 2 rectangles down the back with our non-directional patterned paper, so it doesn't matter. I did choose the pink side with the candy canes. Still a little close to Halloween here, as you can tell. And then I'm going to place that middle square, and then since the Merry Christmas tag was in a landscape style, I have switched it to a landscape card, and we'll just open up that way. And we've created 8 cards with this using some of the tags from that tag paper, and like these ones will need sentiments. These ones, I don't know that I would even add a sentiment to. I probably would just call it done there, but you certainly could put one in if you wanted to. And then the other Merry Christmas version of the card. You can also use this version of the sketch. It would have worked with, say, these style of cards or these ones. Something about the squared one kind of worked better for me today. Let's take a break from making cards and talk about finishing the inside of cards for a minute, because I think this is something that a lot of people feel a bit challenged with. You know, you can stamp a sentiment in the inside, but you know, maybe what are some other choices? And also, like, why make this many Christmas cards? There's a lot of Christmas cards if you don't have that many people to send them to. You can donate your cards. And so there are organizations, there's a list on jesscrafts.com, there'll be a link in the video description of organizations that accept handmade cards. And then the problem becomes, okay, well, what do I write in those cards? I don't know these people. Or there's organizations that serve kids, or you want to send some cards to your own, your children, your grandchildren, or give them to your children or send them to your grandchildren, etc. Anyway, let's talk about some options. Stamp a sentiment inside. Absolutely. Sunny Studios makes a really great like holiday inside sentiments stamp set that I'll link, but also I wanted to share a free resource on jesscrafts.com. I have jokes. These are specifically Christmas jokes, but I also have winter jokes and winter holiday jokes, so like kind of more like just a happy holidays theme, but with winter in mind. And I realize Christmas doesn't happen in winter all around the world, but it does where I live. And then I have these card inserts. Now these are a product from my Etsy shop. So you know they're a purchase where this is a free option. So this will be linked. These are the jokes. There's lots of jokes on jesscrafts.com. But if you want something a little bit more, I have these activities that you can cut out and put on the inside of your card. So there's like color by number and matching and tic-tac-toe boards and dots and boxes. And I wanted to create like a variety. So depending on like the age of the person that you're sending it to, it's just like a little activity to add a little bit of interest to the card. And then, so what you would do with these, for the jokes, you could cut them apart and insert them. I have Christmas, holiday, and winter ones of these as well. But for the card inserts, that's what I'm calling them, you can cut them apart and attach them to the inside of the card. You can pair them with the jokes, you can pair them with the sentiment, and try to make it a little easier to cut. So I've kind of changed up the lines on the edge from previous versions so that you can cut a little more quickly. And I am cutting through a couple sheets at a time because all the lines are in the same place. And so now you see I have like 3 different ones I can put. You can trim off the dotted line if that matters to you. It doesn't particularly matter to me. And then you can place these on the inside of the card, like maybe on the left side, so you can pair it with a sentiment, or just in place of a sentiment or anything on the inside of your card. And when you purchase them, they come in both this portrait and also landscape format. So I have a different theme, but as you can see, it would be the same thing just for landscape cards, and they're sized for A2 cards, but they will fit in cards that are larger than that, of course. Okay. 6x6 paper busting template number 34. That's where we're going to work with this stripe paper. So I'm going to demonstrate cutting it on the stripe paper because that's where it's a little bit more tricky. Otherwise, you can pretty much just read the measurements. But because we're working with tricky papers, I'm going to talk you through it a little bit more. I want to make sure this is as beginner friendly as possible. So cutting off the hole at the top. And then I believe if I cut off 1 inch, I will be just cutting off these Christmas trees. So if I bring it to 5, if I go, it's actually like a smidge over the line, but that's okay because this, like I said, this all is just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit off. But I'm going to bring it to the edge of the Christmas trees rather than per se worrying about the 1 inch mark. Oh, this is tricky because now I'm realizing that the Christmas trees were sitting in that like pink stuff, and I should have cut to the bottom of the pink stuff, but I've already made the cut, so we're gonna commit. And it's okay because the whole pink line is showing here, so if I still wanted to use this side of the paper, I didn't affect that. But the goal, after we cut off those Christmas trees, we're gonna cut it at 1.5 inches and use 2 of the strips from the back side. And the Christmas trees are going to go as a stripe along the front, which you will see when we assemble the card, but basically looking like that. You are kind of limited in having to choose from the bottom and top strip in this instance, but it worked out for me with this paper. Let's look at assembling sketch number 34. I did originally plan to make 8 of these, but then when I went to cut the second sheet of paper, I cut instead of to 1 inch to 3/4 inches. And luckily that worked for one of the other sketches I picked out. I think it's number 26. But yeah, I don't have 8 cards for this one anymore. I chose to use a white card base for this one because it is a little more full than some of the other cards. You wouldn't really see much of the snowflakes, so it didn't feel like a good use of the snowflake card bases, and I only had 24 of them, and I think I'm making 34 cards a day. You guys will know because it'll be the title. And so there are these 4 cards with this particular sketch today. I still think that this needs something to finish it off, but I'm not quite sure what yet. For 6x6 paper busting template number 39, we're working with the squares. And I'm gonna make sure that I cut them on the line rather than worrying is it 3 inches. I wanna basically cut where the 2 designs in the paper meet, and that's my priority. Sometimes, even when I try carefully, I don't exactly get it right. I don't know if you can see there's a tiny bit of orange on the bottom of that tree, but I try. I think that's like the place where those wire guides can be quite helpful, but I'm not gonna, so I have to trim off a little bit. I'm not gonna consider that scrap, personally. And then, again, cutting these in half. I have to kind of like make my decision at this point. If I don't want to use one of these for a focal point, I need to know to cut it up. So I'm trying to decide. I guess I should wait and see what happens with these 2, because if I cut this circle, I still need to trim more. I'm really gonna lose the star on top. So I think that's gonna force my hand and say, I can't use that one as a focal point. I could. Okay, here's a suggestion. It's not what's shown in the sketch, but this is how I'd get around the circle. And I kind of regret chopping off as much as I did at this point, especially because I held both papers together. But you can do it differently because you'll know before you get cutting, hopefully. What I would do is cut these, and then I still couldn't get it exactly. Okay, come back to the corner chomper and round the corners, and that will round away that little, like, I don't know what you call it, that little corner there where the hole was. So you could cut it exactly on the line, and you could do this for any one of the pieces that you want. It's something to consider as you're gonna go along. Hopefully you haven't cut all the papers yet at this point, but any one of them that you want to not have to cut as close and not have to worry about that hole. If that hole is going in a corner, one way to address it. I want to briefly talk about this because I know there's going to be some number of people who are going to want to follow along with this specific paper pad, especially if they see this like the year that the paper pad comes out, or they bought it, or whatever. So this Christmas tree, the way that I cut around it for the hole, and again, I just talked about you could do the corner rounding so that you don't have to cut that bit off, because you can kind of see if you added it back, it would be more similar in size. But right now, this piece from the bottom of the paper is quite a bit bigger. I mean, big is it's a relative term, right? But as you can see, that other pink is taller, and for whatever reason, I think it's easier to see on this side. Let's go like this, maybe. This one is also wider. So because I'm following the lines of the design of the paper, these squares that they've laid out, there's going to be some differences. And I just want to point that out because I think there are some people who, when that happens, they're going to think they did something wrong. And just know there's some variation in pattern paper. And so if you're like, why do my mats not look right, or things like that, it's probably not you. I mean, obviously we all can make mistakes, but it might be helpful to know that is a known issue. Like this piece here is distinctly under 3 inches by about 1/8 of an inch because of where I had to cut the hole and where the lines were for these. And so it is going to affect the final look of the card. And then we do need to cut some of the pieces to be the squares for the back. So once I've rounded the corner of several of these, so I can't use them. What I can do is I can use this other one that I still have, and I'm gonna cut that 3-inch, the 3-inch square into 1.5-inch squares. Lost all the measurements in my head for a second there. And I did have a second piece of paper that I selected, and so I could pick some of these to cut down and use the focal points from these ones. And again, just cutting that 3-inch square into 1.5 and then 1.5. Now let's look at paper busting template number 39 with our A2 card. This one I did decide to use the Snowflake paper for because there's a little bit of extra space on the top and bottom, but we're mostly covering the center, which is kind of where they've left a blank spot. And that way I've kind of like made good use of the balance of that. And then you can try to line things up with your grid mat to make it a little easier to make sure you're going straight across, things like that. I do tend to eyeball it, which does not always work out as much in my favor as I'd like. I want to make sure in this case that all the diamonds are going in the same direction. You absolutely do not have to do that though. I don't think, like that's not backwards, but if you want some consistency across the card, I know some people prefer that. And then again, trying to line up the patterned paper there. This was an instance where my square was not exactly square. It should have been 3 by 3, but because of the nature of the paper, it didn't work out quite that way. So I adjusted my mat to fit better. Okay, this is another place if you want, you could take a strip of that cardstock to prop up the center here. Like you could put a strip right here. It's a personal choice about whether that matters to you. And also it's only particularly problematic if you're using like thicker cardstock, which I tend to use mostly because I use the same cardstock for my mats as for my die cutting, and I prefer thicker cardstock for die cutting. Now, when I was gluing on the little squares with this paper here with the like pink pine needles, I forgot to vary them. Like I forgot to do either the large or smaller ones in the other side of the patterned paper. So as much as possible, I kind of paired the pine needles with these pre-made embellishments so that I wouldn't be pine needle on pine needle like this one turned out. I just think that like it's a little more interesting if you change up the patterns. And then, so hopefully that makes sense. And then here for these ones, I am going to want to pick some embellishments that either fit completely on the square. So for these ones that don't have the 3x3 cut aparts, I'm going to pick some stickers to go with them. I like this Cheers Dears one because I think it could then turn it into like a Happy New Year card and then get a little bit more life out of this. Plus it mixes well with there being some silver on here and silver in the background. And then I do need to pick one more. This one seems to go well. It does bring it back into the Christmas, but that's totally fine. So now we have 44 cards from this one pack of 24 patterned papers from Michaels and Recollections. Some we just took advantage of the beautiful paper that was presented to us and we made the best of it. Like these large ones where, you know, at first you're like, oh, what am I gonna do with this piece of pattern paper? But actually in the end, it winds up really making the card. Same thing with that ornament paper. And just by looking through, I mean, for me, I like to use my sketches. That's why I design them, because I love patterned paper, but it can sometimes be intimidating to know what to do with it. Like having these no scrap templates really helps me. I know that some people, they don't mind scraps. They can use them for tags and the inside of cards, but it gives me, you know, at the very least a jumping off point. And I liked how these Snowflake card bases was able to add a little something, because sometimes with the sketches there can be a little bit of blank space, not too much this time, but it helps to fill that. I do have a video where addressing like if you don't have these Snowflake cards, what else you could do to fill white space that might be helpful if there are some cards where you'd like to see a little bit more of that. And then of course some I did on the white card bases because we had 20 extra cards. I did use a combination of the die cuts that I purchased at Michael's as well, and then I did pull in some stamp sets from my collection. I like to stamp in colored ink, so I pulled in some purple and red ink as well to just kind of offset or to complement some of them. Like here, I thought that there was a lot of purple going on, so I added a little extra red, and then in other times I just used the purple because that was one of the main colors from the cards. Or from the paper pack, and I used purple for my mat, so it really pulled out and emphasized all the purple that was available. I kind of figured purple is just like one of those colors that you just don't reach for very often, so why not take advantage of this paper pack and use up some of that purple cardstock. Remember that all of the templates will be linked in the video description, so you can download them for free if you would rather just purchase the big old pack of them so that you can just print them all off in one document. You're welcome to check out the Etsy shop. And if you found this video helpful, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video, to share it to your crafty community, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.